This is Let Me Sum Up, your regular deep dive into recent reports on climate and energy. I'm Luke Menzel, recording on Wurundjeri land, and I'm joined today by my two co-hosts, Global Vice President for Marketing and Extortion at the Let Me Sum Up podcast, Frankie Muskowicz. Hello, Frankie.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. And if I sound a bit different, it's not because this VP for Marketing and Extortion has huskied my voice out in all the extortion I've been doing over the last couple of weeks. I'm just sick with diseased small children, and it's just that time of year, isn't it? But delighted to be joining you nonetheless from Gadigal country.
And we're also joined by the man you want in the passenger seat if you find yourself on an overnight cross-country road trip from Bonn to Dresden. It is Tennant Reid. Guten Tag, Tennant.
Yes, I'm coming to you from the traditional lands of the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, or other kinds of Goths, at least according to Asterix, in sunny, well, not so sunny today, Germany. And I am absolutely up for the task of keeping people doing the much harder job of driving through the night awake with a mix of the comedy albums from long meandering storytelling Americans.
I have to say, I had so much FOMO when I heard, because I knew you guys were over in Germany on this delegation, seeing all the things relevant to industrial decarb, and I was like, you guys, you're not meant to be in Bonn, and yet there you were, and I was like, oh, shenanigans. I am the queen of FOMO on this podcast, but I had so much FOMO. Was that a fun all-night trip?
It was. I feel like I need to provide just a modicum of explanation. Tennant and I, yes, were on this delegation to Germany looking at industrial decarb, which was a action-packed 4 days, but it happened to coincide with the Bonn Intersessional, and specifically an event that my organisation, the Energy Efficiency Council, is running with Irina on electrification, and the announcement of the action agenda from Turkiye. And so we contrived to be in Bonn on that specific day, but then had to be in Dresden the next day.
Oh my God.
And the only way to make both of those things work was to drive overnight from Bonn to Dresden.
My God. How long of a drive is that even?
So we left Bonn at 7:30 p.m. and we rolled triumphantly into Dresden at about 4:15 in the morning.
Oh boy. And this is where I saw some delirious-looking texts from you, and then even more delirious-looking cocktail choices later that evening after you'd done 48 hours of not much sleep or something.
Yeah. That whole week is a bit of a blur of industrial pipes and bus rides, train rides, and lovely but long car rides. Now, a quick sidebar, because, gentle listener, you may be thinking, why didn't these insane people take one of the fast trains for which Europe in general and Germany in particular is famous for this cross-country trip, instead of getting on the Autobahn and driving, as it turns out, not 200 kilometres an hour instead? And the answer is that a lot of people in Germany are pretty down on the trains because they're not running on time quite so much as they used to. And it's very easy to miss connections and find what look like a very smooth, rapid, efficient route across the country based on Deutsche Bahn's web platform, turning into a nightmare of delays and reroutings and confusion. And so we were told by actual Germans, no, take a car.
That's resurrecting memories of another cross-country trip that we did together in Germany, where we had it was like a long wait between train rides, and we settled up at the local cafe with some beers and pizza. That was delightful.
German shenanigans, yes, but we have a podcast to make, so we should
Let's make it.
We should move on. On this week's show, we take a look at the draft design framework for Australia's new domestic gas reservation scheme. But first, as we record, there are reports that President Trump has been mucking around in DocuSign, applying an electronic signature to an MOU with Iran, whose details are currently mysterious, but apparently will see the Strait of Hormuz opening sooner rather than later. So, crisis managed, I guess, right, Frankie?
I'm not going to be the one to make that kind of a claim on a pod that we're recording on a Tuesday, which people will hear on a Friday. Like, who knows what will be known or remain unknown by the time you, dear listener, are hearing us bang on about this. I mean, there's still an awful lot that is not known about this supposed... this is like the fifth time, I feel like, in the last few weeks where there's been, claims made that we're finally here. But supposedly, like, formal text has been signed on both sides, and it's actually...
Well, both sides bit is the development, because much of the previous runs around the track on this has been Trump making wild claims that a deal was imminent, and the Iranians going, yeah, not so much.
Not so much.
I think the New York Times totted that up at 40 claims the last 2 months.
I guess when you factor in all the collective PTSD and then maybe tuning out of like the last 35 of those, that all checks out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think maybe the thing that's a bit different this time is that we are hearing from the Iranian side that there is in fact a deal. But what we don't know is still a very long list of things, including what is even in this deal anyway, because the text of that has not been made available to anyone beyond the immediate DocuSign parties. So
we need Jerry Seinfeld to show up and tell us what is the deal with this deal.
That's right. And I guess given our episodes come out on a Friday, it'll be very contemporaneous with what is expected to be a ceremonial kind of signing of the thing in Geneva on Friday. So we'll you, dear listener, will be the better judge of where we've all landed. I think what's been announced isn't it, obviously an immediate ceasefire on both sides. I think whether that is held to over the next couple of days is probably the most significant kind of sign as to its prospective longevity beyond Friday and things like that. And what must be table stakes on the US side is the immediate reopening of the Strait of Hormuz with no, Iranian blockade or US doing their own kind of counter version of that, and presumably a rejection of the idea of having to pay fees and things like that for safe passage. But I do wonder if that will eventuate as truth, because there's been sort of long suggestions from Iran that they would, propose from here on out because they can, and they're there and will continue to be there after the US decides to go home, whenever that will be. They're in a position to do that, and that they're not the only ones as well. Oman has made similar kind of noises along those lines too, right?
Yeah, the idea of, because they are the nations with the coastline at the narrowest point of the strait, and Iran has been saying for a while that they would want to make some form of revenue from allowing passage of the strait and generously share that with Oman, and Oman has seemed... It's hard to tell if they're genuinely unenthusiastic about the idea or if they're sort of playing unenthusiastic while actually being perfectly happy to get a new source of revenue. And Trump has said explicitly that the deal contains no tolls, and there will never be tolls, And Iran is saying
there might be fees.
There might be fees. And a fee is not a toll for some sort of service, like not getting blown up. I mean, that's a pretty attractive service.
It's a high-value service.
That's right.
Like with so much of the rest of this deal, like that is, I think, one that many will be particularly conscious of and wanting to watch closely. I guess there's also the question of what happens with the freezing of assets on the Iranian side that other countries have done in and around this. Also, what, if any, compensation is put on the table for the destruction of a whole bunch of infrastructure in the region, and who would fund that? Is that something that's just done within the Gulf states? Like, what, if any, US contribution could there be to that? What kind of a signal does that send? It's all very complex.
It sure is. And it's also unclear, but if the upshot is that there's some form of reconstruction of Iran fund that is capitalized by the Gulf states, like the whole thing will have worked out extraordinarily badly for the Gulf states in particular. The war was started apparently without consultation with them. It blew up a bunch of their stuff. It damaged their reputation. It may have, probably has, accelerated the ruining of their biggest set of industries in the long term through faster transition away from oil, and they would be paying for the reconstruction of the power that blew up their kit and bottled up their oil. Seems like that would stick in the craw if that is indeed true, but we don't know yet.
Speculation abounds, and we'll know more soon. It does feel like we're sort of appear to be in the end game of at least this phase of hostilities. If that is indeed the case, what you just said, Tennant, around like the impact of this whole imbroglio on the acceleration away from fossil fuels, I think could be the most enduring and interesting legacy of this whole misadventure. And for governments in Australia, but also around the world, if we are getting through this sort of acute crisis phase, it does mean that ministers and departments will have the opportunity to start turning their attention away from how do we sort of deal with those immediate issues around fuel security to how do we kind of like invest in policies and regulations and incentives that improve our resilience and make it much less likely that we're going to be exposed to these sorts of risks in the future, because nobody has found this very fun. And if you have the ability over time to reduce your reliance on these sorts of supply chains, I think that kind of in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, and certainly in the conversations I've been having with government, really focus the mind on particularly the electrification task as it relates to transport. But I think it will have broader implications beyond that as well.
Well, I have to pull you up there, Luke. The makers of Lego-based propaganda videos in Iran have had a whale of a time.
That's true. I mean, like just in sort of thinking about when this is happening during the year, like of course it's going to be welcome if there's some stability around this deal at this time, and maybe it just means that we're through, as you suggest, Luke, the kind of the worst of this phase of things. It'd be a pretty brave, person to suggest that there's not a high risk of this either kicking back off at some point in the near future or recurring in the near term. The uncertainty that sits, attached to these particular supply chains with fuels coming through the Strait of Hormuz will prompt kind of broader, medium to longer term planning decisions, I think. And it's, it ought to give some tailwinds to the COP process in Turkiye if there's a bit of stability around that situation over the coming months out of the deal, because we should be in a position to not just be in crisis mode anymore, but kind of thinking a bit more clearly about the what next.
Yeah.
What are the lessons learned through this period? What are the actions that nation states can take to reduce their risk and exposure to this kind of uncertainty into the future? And I know it's sort of not the focus of this podcast, but it is ostensibly one of the reasons the US went to Iran in the first place, which was that they were concerned about Iran getting very close to being able to develop nuclear weapons. And it's just very unclear exactly where this deal is going to land on that particular question, which was not maybe that it was ever the whole point of it, because there's a lot of cynics out there that would, talk about other reasons the US has done in the past and, continues to kind of be obsessed with this part of the world and its resources. It's also kind of unclear whether this deal will land in any better or more kind of progressive a place than the Obama deal that Trump made such a, point of rubbishing over the last decade since, he's been in a position to influence things. So
I very much agree that attention needs to substantially increase now on the reduction in our long-term exposure to this kind of disruption. But we also do have a little bit of crisis left to go, because suppose the deal doesn't fall over. It appears that the reopening could be anywhere within the next 30 days, or maybe that's 30 days from Friday. And then it's about 6 weeks from whenever oil tankers do start to move in big numbers through the Strait of Hormuz before any of that oil and products makes its way as far as Australia. So that is 6 to 10 weeks of abnormally low flows. And that is time, even if you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, that is time for things to remain tight. And then you've also got a long period of the various lagged supply chain problems continuing to bite in plastics supply chains, metals, aluminium production in the Gulf is going to take a while, like maybe a year, to return to normal. Other stuff will get reconstructed over an even longer period. And then the slowest burn is what impact all this is going to have ultimately on food markets, given the disruption to fertilizer supplies. And so that stuff will be playing out for a while. Even if the situation stops getting worse at the front end.
Well, on that cheery note, shall we chat about a report?
Yes.
Let's.
It is over a decade since the gas industry on Australia's east coast began exporting LNG in earnest, linking local gas prices with international markets and pushing up costs for gas users large and small. But according to critics, it didn't need to be this way. They say the price rises could have been avoided had the Commonwealth established a domestic gas reservation that set aside a portion of gas supply for Australian businesses and households, maintaining an air gap between domestic and global prices. Well, for the Albanese government, it seems to be a case of better late than never. Late last year, they announced their intention to legislate a domestic gas reservation, but beyond that, details have been a bit thin on the ground. However, all that changed a few weeks ago when they released their draft design framework for consultation. So, Tennant, we've had a flip through this snappy 26-page document. What did you make of it?
This is a much more detailed framework than we've seen previously. It doesn't answer every question, and there are some areas where there will be heated submissions at 10 paces on finalising those elements. But I think we have a better basis now to assess what this thing is going to do and whether it's going to work. And like my short version is, I think this has a very decent chance, or more than decent chance. I think it will disconnect local and international prices, and it will do a degree of price suppression within some limits, I think. So what there is in this reservation is a domestic supply obligation for all gas exporters starting in July next year, set notionally at the equivalent of 20% of their total export volumes. Big asterisk on that, though, because there is a provision for the DSO, the domestic supply obligation, to be set at a lower level, a lighter burden, if it could not be met without hitting those exporters' existing export contracts. So this is trying to combine the sacrosanctness of those contracts with a desire to have a near immediate impact. And that we should come back to how that one might play out. Then there's more flexibility. So to meet your obligation, if you're an exporter, you could make deals with other exporters to arrange for them to supply domestic gas on your behalf, or you could do deals for new renewable gas to be supplied, which wouldn't be terribly financially attractive on absent some other mechanism at the moment. Or, and this is the big flexibility, by arranging additional domestic supply. So it can't just be contracting with an existing domestic supplier to claim credit for gas they were going to sell to the domestic market anyway. It's got to be additional, which is a concept that has never been difficult in any other context.
And for you listening at home, that's Tennant being ironic.
It's true. And then there's flexibility if you've agreed a DSO, but for one reason or another, it can't be cleared in a year, like maybe nobody's buying the gas that you, the hard put upon exporter, are trying to sell to them. In that case, you can be let off a bit for that year, except the gas you didn't supply that year is tacked on to what you've got to supply in future years, which could be an issue with like accumulating surpluses. We might come back to that. And the intention is to engineer a persistent, modest oversupply of the domestic market. We can debate whether that will be achieved, like whether it will be an oversupply, whether it will be modest, whether it will be persistent. But that's the size of it. They've got to sell the gas into the local market, and there will be some flexibility up until the point that the existing contracts roll off. And then, which is mostly the mid-2030s, although one of them rolls off in 2031. And from that point on, it's like 20%, unless they decide to change it. And there's room for an ad hoc review by involved ministers to adjust the domestic supply obligation default percentage for reasons. Like maybe we're transitioning and we don't need so much gas anymore.
So this is all to be overseen and administered by the Australian Energy Regulator. So they've got that formal role. But the thing that struck me reading through this was just the huge amount of power this puts in the hand of ministers, both in terms of, adjustments to the DSO that applies to specific exporters, but also kind of like the overarching frameworks, the review, they can raise the 20%, they can lower the 20%, they can look at, forward projections for supply-demand balance that the AER works up with advice from AEMO and adjust that for the year that they're in, or indeed subsequent years, there is the opportunity for ministers to intervene very directly on a whole range of issues. Now, the degree to which they do that, to the degree to which they utilise those powers, I think there'll be a strong interest in keeping things pretty steady. But they are through this new legislative instrument, and there is legislation that will need to pass the Parliament to operationalise this new regime. They will have significant powers to shape how Australia's gas markets are operating in close to real time.
Yeah, there are a lot of decisions and that are needed, or that there is scope for. And I have heard some concerns from gas stakeholders on the both the supply and the demand sides, that there's so much scope for these decisions that the whole thing seems a bit uncertain and unpredictable. I think that might shake out a bit with some experience, but yes, a lot of decision points. And if government was, now at the apex of its decisiveness and spinefulness around gas, and subsequently had a bit of a collapse into everything's for the best to the best of all possible worlds inactivity, they could do a very weak version of all this, but the contrary is also true.
I think you're right. It could shake out, but the way that it shakes out potentially is that in pursuing a status quo which is modest oversupply to depress prices, there's a lot of knobs to tweak to hit that, right? And so in the first couple of years, there could actually need to be quite a few adjustments as you sort of find the sweet spot for that. And of course, noting that, the market is not standing still. There is still an aspiration in this document for there to be new supply coming online.
Yes.
And this is also happening in the context of us expecting quite a lot of fuel switching to be taking place over the coming years. And so there's a lot of things that are shifting in the market, and the various rates of knots that mean that achieving that could require ministers to stay on the balls of their feet.
Yes, and so many moving parts. And moving parts are just in the market. So, yes, there's a lot of visible factors that are pushing some areas of gas demand down. The uptake of storage affecting gas-powered generation demand, the electrification of many homes and buildings. In industry, there's both downward factors around electrification and around the intense competitive pressures that some gas-intensive industries are facing. There's also the potential for gas-based direct reduction of iron in the steel sector to substantially increase gas demand from industry. So, who knows? On the supply side, it's very hard. I think it's basically impossible to make numbers add up without additional supply investment somewhere, although people have got very strong feelings either way about particular gas fields and resources. And one of the things that this policy is cognizant of is that given the obligation that's being imposed with respect to the eastern half of the country, sits on exporters who are all located in Queensland, but most of the gas demand that's not to do with export is in southern states. There's not enough pipeline capacity currently to move gas from north to south sufficient to meet that demand if it's all coming from Queensland increasingly. And so the absence of that capacity is one of the factors that can be cited by an exporter looking for an easier DSO. And the one who will be most looking for that is GLNG, the one that Santos operates. Santos, the most unhappy about all of this, Santos and GLNG, the ones that are taking gas from that was otherwise expected to be available to the domestic market and exporting that rather than meeting their commitments with gas they've developed themselves. And so are they going to be effectively pressured to underpin the expansion of north-south pipeline capacity as the quid pro quo for giving them a lighter domestic supply obligation for the first few years, during which they physically could not meet such an obligation, but putting in place the physical conditions that will enable them to be forced to meet it later? Don't know, but plausibly.
I'm not a close observer of this area of policy, and the thing that was sort of really striking to me, and like you just sort of talked about the many knobs that could be dialed here, but there's like my kind of initial take, and you both sort of referred to this as a very detailed framework. There are so many gaps in areas which you could, just sort of see, kind of, flexibility being maximized and, all this sort of stuff. Like the examples that were given in terms of the way you might change those supply obligations over the sort of while ranged from a fully compliant, this is all fine, to literally a company not meeting its obligation at all. And like every kind of permutation between those two seems provided for in this framework. And, you kind of outline conditions in which those things would be decided. But like, that's a huge kind of variability in how this might be implemented. And the paper implies there's new headline legislation that would need to be passed to give effect to much of this. And then kind of important decisions about what sits in the legislation versus what sits in subordinate regulation. That's a very important distinction to make when it comes to things you can easily change or not down the track. And also what this gas reservation replaces as well. I guess the paper is kind of keen to labour that many of the elements kind of within this or like exist to a certain extent in one form in the mandatory code that's sort of in place at the moment. But I wanted a vibe check on that, because obviously this does impose an explicit obligation to actually deliver gas into the domestic market rather than just make best endeavours at offers and things like that. My kind of 20,000-foot view of this, where there's like an enormous amount of flexibility that could be built in, that could mean like you get very like different extreme versions of how this would operate in practice. I couldn't find a reference in here to explicitly which ministers this sits with. I'm imagining it's climate and energy and resources. Is that right? Because it says ministers.
Yep. And
I wasn't sure if it was referring to those two cabinet positions federally only.
I believe there's also a role for the industry minister.
Yeah, so I have heard that it's energy, resources and industry, but that has been communicated to me verbally, and I did not see any explicit reference to that in the paper.
There wasn't. I did a word search on ministers just to see if there was any, well, just, because it's just sort of left out there, and I wondered if that had just been made clear elsewhere, and I haven't been privy to that. But that, it also kind of, in the hands of another government with a different posture, that matters a lot.
Yep.
As well as what goes in ledge versus regs. And I'm certain that when this makes its way into the parliamentary process, that'll be top of mind for, for those that need to decide on whether and how they support its progress in that place.
So I've got a thought that goes to this what's in the ledge, what's in the regs issue, which is there's an idea that all kinds of sensible people, including Alison Reeve and Luke Menzel and me have been pushing that is not reflected in this design at all, which is giving...
Shocking.
Incredible. Giving the exporters the option to acquit their domestic supply obligation in part on the demand side by paying for, in a verifiable way, the transition or at least efficiency improvement of gas use. Now, there is in this proposal this element around renewable gas provision. The most obvious way for that renewable gas option to be reflected is through a capacity to recognise the retirement of renewable gas certificates. Whatever bit of the eventual legislation is is the hook on which that unit retirement can be recognised is hung, should also be a basis for regulations that recognise energy savings certificates from New South Wales or Victorian energy efficiency certificates from Victoria. The legislative requirement to do a good idea through regulations should be there. It would be great if this just became part of the design from the get-go, but I think the government might be actually quite conscious of how complex the rest of what they're doing is and not wanting to add an additional module that they regard as complicated and not part of the minimum viable product at the outset. But the ability to do it seems like it would be there. He said, not having seen the draft legislation.
Well, but your point is that if you're already setting up that mechanism to acknowledge renewable gases in the ledge, like it should be relatively straightforward with some careful drafting to allow other forms of substitution, including demand reductions, that will play the same role in terms of acquitting the responsibilities of the liable parties. I think this is a good idea. I think that there is not enough attention on how to support particularly small and medium energy intensive businesses to reduce their reliance on fossil gases, and that can be, as you say, through efficiency. Equally, for many businesses, there's the opportunity to electrify. I just like the poetry of the idea of gas exporters paying Australian businesses to get off gas.
I agree. I love the poetry in it, but it's not as though we don't have analogous examples of that already on the electricity side of things with the white certificate schemes that exist at the state level. You're putting an obligation on gentailers to purchase certificates for efficiency to get people to use less of it. So it's, it's not as though this is a groundbreaking concept in one respect. I'm sort of, it's good to see that the renewable gases is kind of, notionally there and could be considered. But the other thing that certainly kind of came across to me is just that, when you get your activated core stakeholders are going to be large gas companies that have an interest in specific bits of this. I do just wonder to the extent to which those broader perspectives have been, as activated or kind of engaged beyond the, eminences, such as those you kind of highlighted there, Tennant. This is a very niche kind of consultation. I do wonder if the broader kind of stakeholder universe that would support those kind of ideas have been as engaged on all of this.
I think you're making people in the gas consultation team at DQ cry, Frankie. Niche? Why?
No,
this is the grand final of gas policy consultations. No, it is pretty arcane. It's true. I think the thing that should ultimately give some prominence to that demand side idea is that it's a it looks like it could be significantly cheaper as a source of compliance, flexibility, than biomethane, but also potentially cheaper than the just producing additional gas and then selling that for a moderate domestic price rather than a high export price. And so, like, money talks. Also, of course, you don't have those infrastructure limits on the provision. Well, you have different infrastructure limits, actually, on the ability to do electrification. So that might be helpful too in enabling a faster ramp up of the total obligation, given the time it will take to get expanded gas pipeline capacity in place. I don't think this could fully substitute for the other, the supply side options, but it would cut the cost and increase the speed of the whole thing, which seems good even for people who are not enthused about the draining away of their core market.
It does strike me that, this consultation is happening at an interesting time. Like, I think there's sort of broad expectation we're going to be seeing consultation from the government on their low carbon liquid fuels market measure, which would be looking at how you drive demand for that across the system. And like this would be one way of driving demand. So anyway, just some food for thought. I wonder if that choreography was on purpose. I'm here for it if it was.
I've got one additional thing. There have been some people worried that, or maybe excited, that the 20% obligation is going to produce like a large oversupply of gas that is sold way below even its production cost, just in order to maintain the right to export. And I don't think that large surplus is likely to result in a persistent way. We'll just ignore the sort of ramp up phase of all this and like lighter obligations for a bit. Whenever you get to the full 20%, and assuming that the volume of exports is roughly the same as it is today, that 20% would translate to gas that's about half of current East Coast gas consumption. And that plus purely domestic production equals enough to have a secure buffer. But if it's producing more gas than there is demand for at a price that recognises production transport costs, and prices are bid down, what is going to happen is that purely domestic fraction of gas production is going to shrink, because those people don't have to be in business, whereas the exporters have to supply this gas if they want to remain exporters, and it's worth quite a lot of money to be an exporter. So domestic fraction flexing down would rebalance the market. It would avoid a really large surplus of gas producing strange outcomes in the domestic market. That only lasts until the point, I guess, where domestic demand is half what it currently is. That feels like it's a little way away. But if that's the circumstance we find ourselves in, well, I guess there will be arguments about reducing the percentage, and one of those ad hoc ministerial, they could do anything they put their minds to reviews would presumably be triggered. Or maybe not, who knows?
Maybe just in concluding, because it's like right at the end of the paper, but there's a very big stick is being wielded with this legislation, both from a tenant. You referred to, license to export, like, so that's, feels like the ultimate threat on the table, that those licenses could be suspended or revoked, which would be very consequential to the operations of these businesses, but also not insignificant financial penalties as well. Noting that, again, like, I haven't been familiar with those that are set in the current gas markets. seems to suggest this is similar, but, the greatest of $100 million, or if a court can determine the value of a benefit obtained in having broken the rules or with non-compliance 3 times the value of that benefit, or if the court can't determine the value of that benefit, 30% of the body corporate's adjusted turnover during the breach period. They're big dollars, huge dollars. Anyway, so everything you just said about how they'll be, minded to ensure compliance at almost any cost. That's why.
Well, that and the size and value of the export market. And today, that looks very sizable and very valuable and a big motivator. And there will be even more reasons to be interested in what happens to that export market in the future.
One thing this definitely does, if it goes through in a form similar to what is proposed here, is it sets the table very clearly for that next phase of contracting and what expectations will be. There's a lot of flexibility and ability to shape the requirements on businesses to accommodate, the existing contracts. That's a core design principle here. But moving forward, very clear expectation and not a lot of evidence that there'll be much latitude for businesses to beg for special treatment, because these are the rules of the road going forward, is the message of this document. And so importantly, to a degree, and, there's a lot of story to be written between now and, the 2030s, when contracting will be done for whatever the gas market looks like henceforward. But to the degree Australia's playing a role in those global markets, and the degree that there is local demand that needs to be serviced, whatever that looks like, there's going to be a very different set of expectations for gas exporters to the ones that they were able to secure when they spun this industry up a decade and a bit ago.
Absolutely. And, and this isn't happening, of course, in a vacuum. Like, there are other very consequential kind of parallel policy debates being had on taxation of the sector. So, it's going to be fascinating to see how they respond to this consultation, how that sort of evolves through the year into more detailed design and legislation, because you could easily contemplate those two concepts being connected in some way, certainly in the broader stakeholder universe.
Yeah. It is a huge pity that nothing, whether it was like this framework or something, taking a different approach, but an approach, that nothing was in place in the late 2000s and early 2010s when the East Coast gas export terminals got locked in. The barn door was left open, the livestock bolted, and the Australian government has been running ineffectually after ever since.
As always, we close out the show with one more thing in which we all share something that is currently captivating our attention. Frankie, what have you got?
I am reconstituting Muskovich's Methane Musings corner here for my one more thing.
We need a jingle.
Yes, well...
Muskovich's Methane Musings. Ooh.
I love that for me so much. I think I had telegraphed this because keen observers of things that the Climate Change Authority does will have noticed that they identified methane as a key topic for their work this year. They've now come good on that promise, and there's a consultation paper out, just launched last week, and you could be forgiven for having missed it because there's a huge amount on at the moment, but very exciting that they've sort of launched out with that work. They've, chosen to focus in on fossil methane, so this isn't looking at the opportunity set across, all methane emissions across the economy, because we know that there are significant sources of methane in agriculture, and other sectors. I think it's sort of fair to say if you were going to do that segmentation, of where the emissions sit, like obviously ag is a big one, but I think, equally or sort of as significantly big are kind of abatement opportunities that exist in fossil fuel supply chains. Specifically calling out things that we've talked about before on this pod, or I have banged on about, in terms of fugitive emissions from coal mines, be they open or closed, as well as sort of fugitive from gas extraction. So anyway, a lot of questions. It's great that we are having this discussion, and it's the flip side or kind of complementary piece to the electrification agenda, which is really, starting to take flight, in a really big way, kind of internationally and things like that. So this is where are the biggest sort of areas of low-hanging fruit domestically in those supply chains we can look at, where potentially where electrification might not be an option. So super important work. Thoroughly endorse. I'm going to put it a strong vote that this go to the top of LMSU's to read pile. So maybe it'll feature on a future episode. But exciting developments here. Thank you, gentlemen.
Lobbied live on the podcast.
Methane mischief managed. Thanks. Oh, I love that. I need a little magical twinkle that comes after that. Mark, could you just wizard that up there?
Do you want a little bewitched?
Yep. I do. That's exactly what I was thinking of. I'm even wiggling my nose, Mark. You can't see it.
All right. Tennant, what have you got?
Well, as a person who has taken very long international flights recently, I have an irrelevant but highly entertaining movie recommendation. It's John Woo's Hard Boiled, 1992, a movie, an action movie that starts over the top and keeps ascending from there. Until the crescendo where Chow Yun-fat saves the last of a very large number of babies from a hospital under assault by criminal hoodlum goons, holding that baby, blowing away bad guys while singing and rapping to the baby to keep it calm. And then the baby repays the favour by putting out Chow Yun-fat's pants, which have caught fire, by peeing on them. It's a non-stop cavalcade of insanity, and no pane of glass in Hong Kong went unshattered in the course of making this movie.
Wow. So, hard recommend?
Yeah, if you watched Hot Fuzz and went, yes, but I want the version of this that's taking itself seriously, then hard recommend. Hard boiled.
All right. Well, for my one more thing, I'm going to point you all to some Michael Liebreich content. That little known and underexposed human in the energy space.
Drinking violet.
But had the great pleasure of spending some time with Michael on his recent trip to Australia. He was obviously keynoting at our national conference at the Energy Efficiency Council, but doing a bunch of other stuff. I understand recording a bunch of podcast episodes for his podcast, which will be forthcoming, a special series on the Australian context with some friends of this podcast featuring along the way. But there are some videos floating around. If you didn't make it to the conference, he gave a very good keynote, and that keynote and the subsequent chat that I had with him on stage is now up on YouTube on the Race for 2030 YouTube channel. We'll link it in the show notes. We don't always put our conference keynotes up, but Race sort of helped support Michael's trip, and so they've videoed it and put it up there. So if you didn't make it to the conference, you can check that out. And then also on iView, Michael hopped up at the National Press Club the following week, and he had some thoughts to share there as well. I guess, Tennant, you were there for that?
So I saw the Press Club speech set piece, and I thought there was some very good content. Some of the journos could have listened a little more closely to that content before formulating their questions, but some of them were very on the ball. So, it takes all sorts.
It certainly does. So we'll link all of that in the show notes. Michael sort of reflecting on electrification, renewable transition, the current state of the world, and what it all means specifically for Australia. So worth your time. We are almost done, but every fortnight after the show we record a bonus episode called There Is Too Much, in which we grab a drink and put our feet up on the desk and cover something we didn't have time for on the main show. Tennant, what are we turning our attention to this week?
The distant shores of Germany. How many shores does Germany have? It has some. I haven't seen them.
It has at least one.
And the intercessional negotiations under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change held in actually quite gorgeous Bonn on the banks of the Rhine River. There were discussions of the action agenda. There were discussions of trade. There were Australians trotting out Australian leadership. It was all happening. And the only possible way you can find out what happened, dear listener, is to become a Super Summerupperer and subscribe. There's no toll on Super Summeruppering. It's merely a fee.
Yes. Run, don't walk to letmesumup.net. You can find your way to the Support LMSU tab, and via that route to some sweet boko. That is now our show for today. This podcast was edited by energy professional and podcast tragic Mark Spencer from Here Media Studio. Frankie, you like promoting things. What would you like to promote today?
I do, but today I'm just going to do a shout out actually to a colleague of all of ours, but I just want to shout out to Anna Freeman, Luke, who, and I'm sure we'll get into it in the bonus episode, but it's just been kind of delightful watching her work alongside you at EEC. She's taken on a role as head of electrification, but she's been very much at the nucleus and centre of all of that global activity in getting electrification on the action agenda for COP. That's a big deal. And to have that effort kind of headquartered out of Australia with your organisation is, really awesome. And I just want to shout out to all involved, but particularly her and you for your kind of work, sort of running the secretariat for that. It's just super exciting to see that on the global kind of stage, and can't wait to see where this kind of goes through the middle, through the rest of the year into the COP negotiations. Just super exciting times. And, as all of us in our day jobs are kind of various herders of cats, having an appreciation for what might have been going on behind the scenes over the last sort of several months to bring all that together. It's no small thing. So well done, and so exciting.
Yes, Anna Freeman, long-time national advocacy powerhouse, increasingly recognised as a global powerhouse as she spearheads a lot of that work. And yes, some big outcomes on the electrification topic in the action agenda, and we will be getting into that behind the paywall. But for now, for Frankie Muskovich and Tennant Reid, I'm Luke Benzel. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you again soon.